Um, as frontline LGBTI human rights defenders, we are often called on and are quick to respond to situations of crisis. But very often we fail to plan for ourselves as frontline defenders. So the conversation I'm inviting us to have today is, planning for security, particularly for those of us who put ourselves forward and are well known, and some of the risks that are attached to that. It's going to be a very brief panel, about just under an hour. It's very highly unlikely that we'll be able to get engagements from the floor, but if I check my time and we have time, we might do that. What we'll do though is at the end of the panel, we'll have a poll. There's going to be one question about whether or not we need to put in place a security protocol for LGBTI frontline defenders, and it's going to be an opportunity for everybody in the room to have a say on whether or not this is necessary. But to get us started, I wanted us to have a bit of a conversation about the emerging threats. With other human rights defenders, such as journalists, for example, there's a protocol that kicks into place in in emergency situations or crisis situations. But that doesn't really happen with our movements, and I want us to talk a little bit about why that is so. But before we get to the conversation about the why, I want us to talk about the emerging threats. We know the threats to the community. We are harassed, we are beaten, we are kicked out of homes, we are publicly outed. The police routinely round us up and arrest us illegally, detain us illegally. We know these things, but there's emerging threats that we weren't aware of, and I know that Anil has something particularly interesting about the context in South Africa, and will share that briefly with us. You've been doing this work in Zambia. What has necessitated the conversations around security in Zambia?
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for making the time. Is it just me, or have we just been coughing more since the announcement was made this morning? There's more clearing of throats. So my name is Mino. Like Kopano said, I am from Zambia, and I work for an LBQ organization called Women's Alliance for Equality. At the same time, I'm also a member of the Board of Trustees of the Other Foundation, and it's been great to meet everybody this week and listen to the conversations. Back to what necessitated the work for Zambia in particular. Over the years, right, we heard the Christian nation narrative, and it's thrown around quite carelessly, if I may say. So over the years, we get times when social media is going buzz with people bringing conversations about gay rights, LGBTI issues, and it's usually, I think in the last 3, 4, 5 years maybe, the narrative was largely negative. But I think now it's more neutral to positive, which has also created its own conversation. Why are people more open to talk about it now? Why are people more open to even express their positive opinions about it now? But in particular was an incident in December last year when we hosted, so our organization hosts some Pride events every year. So because of the security context, the legal context, it's usually a closed event. There's a lot of consideration taken into security, venues not being leaked before the event is held, having security at the event, also things like transportation, so people are not seen to be moving in huge groups that call unwanted attention. So after the Pride event in December, and we had professional pictures that were taken of the event, and so a few online blogs ran this story to say gays and lesbians met and had a gay party, and they had photos of people posted online. So luckily it was small blogs and small pages that didn't really have a huge following, But the worry was if this gets picked up by the pages that have hundreds of thousands of followers, it can easily blow up into something we can't manage anymore. So the thinking around that was then we can't keep waiting for something to happen, then try to figure out how to correct it. Because when we're dealing with our people, things can escalate from 0 to 100 in an hour or less. And if people were arrested, what do we do? Who do we call? Do we even know where to start from? And so it was like, how do we move away from this waiting for something to happen? Then we start running around, then we start panicking, then we start trying to call people in the middle of the night to say, what can we do? Are you guys available to help? Are you guys available to call somebody to help out? So that started the thinking around, can we develop some type of crisis response mechanism? We know the risks we face in the work we do. I can speak most to the Zambian context, but I think it's pretty similar in most African countries. So we know the risks we face. It's arrest, it's blackmail, it's hate speech, sometimes violence. So we know the risks we face. Can we now start to plan for those risks? If somebody is arrested, who is it that we can call? But also mapping our allies in that response, because we can't speak as one voice. We spoke about this earlier in this conference. We need multiple voices speaking together, and that amplifies the message. So who are allies? If it's an incident of negative media reporting, who is it that we're calling that will be most effective to address this situation? If it's an issue of police brutality or blackmail, who is most well-placed to support that? So that's what started that conversation around developing a crisis response mechanism for the country, possibly for the region, and that's what people will get to vote on later on, if this is something we even need. Yeah.
This is very interesting because we know that networks create a security net for frontline activists. So it's very interesting that you brought that point about which allies we need to tap into. And when we have the conversation later about what resources are available and what resources do we need, I'd want us to get back to that question on allies. AD, COVID surfaced a lot of security concerns for the community for all. What kind of requests did you receive in response to some of those security issues that emerged directly linked to COVID or that were exacerbated by the COVID context in the region?
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Before I start, I would talk a bit about Dignity for All, or Freedom House. Freedom House is an NGO based in the United States, and within the organization, we have a program dedicated to providing protection or financial support to activists at risk. And given the fact that LGBTQI people have a particular challenge, within that program, we have a sub-program focusing on the LGBTQI specific issues in terms of security. That's what we call Dignity for All. And we intervene in two ways: proactively giving small grants to advocate in a context of increasing targeting. It might be legislative, restrictive place to the LGBTQI community, but also providing training on security. The second segment of our intervention is giving money to LGBTQI activities facing risk. For instance, Mino, may I use you as in my, sorry, is arrested. There is need for a lawyer. We can financially pay for the lawyer. Or the security situation wouldn't allow Mino to stay where she is, where there you are. We can provide financial resources to pay for the transport, to relocate in another location, and pay for housing within a certain period of months. So that's what we do in concrete terms. Coming back to your question about new trends related to security, COVID, we've seen an increasing demand with regard to medical services being deprived, or LGBTQI community not having access to medical services during COVID, but also we've seen work issues, the fact that they are no longer financially able to operate, and that's increasing, like they are in a space which is not safe for them. Normally going for work was a bit safe, and now they have to be confined in a space already dangerous. So those are some of the developing new threats we've seen with regard to COVID. Thank you. Back to you.
All right. Thank you very much, AD. So it's interesting that, you know, institutions like Dignity for All and Freedom House have support that's available. I want to ask about whether or not we're taking up this kind of support. But before you answer, I want to bring Anil into the conversation. You've been doing some really interesting research around biometrics, especially in the context of South Africa. And when we were chatting earlier, you know, there were some really interesting insights that you're sharing with me about how that process impacts the safety and security of trans people in particular. So can you tell us a little bit about that research, and then we already move into the security challenges that you've noted in that process?
So thanks so much. Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Anil Padavartan. I'm the programs manager at Gender Dynamics. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm standing in today for my colleague Grayson Taylor, who is unfortunately not feeling well, and we hope that he'll be all right. And the research that we've been doing is a collaboration with Privacy International, and it's on digital ID systems, which is a growing issue in Africa as a whole, and it has now arrived in South Africa, and I suspect that it's a matter of time before it gets rolled out in other Southern African countries. And this is something that I think we very much need to keep our eye on as a development that needs to be monitored for its human rights implications. Because where these systems have been rolled out internationally and around the world and in Africa, there have been human rights issues that have arisen. Now, the way that you might have heard the Deputy Minister earlier referring to the fact that the Department of Home Affairs is bringing in a new system and they're looking at ID numbers, because our current ID system in South Africa codes gender into the ID number. It's basically a relic of the apartheid system, which encoded race into the ID number as well. But with liberation, they removed the race coding, but they retained the coding for gender. And everyone in South Africa is registered from birth as either male or female, which obviously excludes people who are intersex and excludes people who are non-binary. And this is a problem that we've been engaging with Home Affairs on a number of problems around legal gender recognition for a number of years. And last year they developed a policy around this digital system, and they're presenting it as a solution to a problem of saying, we've got a new ID system coming in and we can accommodate non-binary identities within it. But looking beyond the kind of immediate impact of that for the trans and gender diverse community, we were concerned about the broader human rights implications of this, particularly after conversations with Privacy International. And what happens basically is that, first of all, with the system, it's based on biometric data, so either fingerprints or facial recognition technology. And that should immediately be a red flag for the trans and gender diverse community, because one of the things we know is that faces change with hormone therapy. So that's a concern. The other concern is that the way that these systems have been implemented internationally is that they are often bought by governments from private sector suppliers, and these are proprietary systems where it is closed source software that's developed by a company and then sold as a solution to a government. And that company has access to the data as well as the state officials. And there have been data security breaches in other countries. And if we are looking at a system that potentially has an X marker or some other system for accommodating non-binary people, a data breach can be a very serious issue indeed in terms of people's rights to privacy and right to safety and security. So that's an immediate concern. Another potential concern is what is the intention behind bringing in a digital system? And often governments will say that it's in order to assist people in accessing state services. But in practice, what happens is that it is used to exclude people and to gatekeep from state services. And it's often the poorest of the poor who are under scrutiny and have these additional barriers put in the way of being able to access services. And of particular concern is the impact that this is going to have on migrants and refugees and asylum seekers in South Africa. Because with an analog system, there's a human being you're interacting with. So you're able to go to a clinic, and if you don't have a South African ID document, you can explain yourself of why you still need to be able to access services. In a digital system, that's not possible. And you could be potentially stopped at the door and not be able to get in with a card. And this can exclude people from other Southern African countries who are living and working in South Africa and should legitimately have access to healthcare services here, for example. The other concern is that in terms of the rollout, within South Africa we have got a legal framework. Whatever the government brings in will have to comply with the Constitution, the right to privacy, the POPI Act, etc. The concern is that if South Africa is kind of seen as a leader in the region, that this might be a system that is brought in by other governments, and that then increases the government's ability to exercise surveillance activities. And I think that should be something that we should all be very, very concerned about, is the potential for surveillance that this brings in. Because it's one thing for a democratic government with a certain amount of checks and balances to have the power for surveillance. It's another in situations where people are already facing persecution in their countries, facing harassment in their countries. And this is a major issue for concern. So we don't have a lot of details at the moment of what technology the Department of Home Affairs is bringing in, how they plan to implement it. It's something that I think that everyone should be aware of and should be monitoring, particularly those of us who are concerned about opening up access to social security rather than introducing more gatekeeping and putting more barriers in the way of access. And also particularly for other countries who are looking at these developments in contexts where there is already a threat to activists. Thanks so much.
Very interesting. And I know it's easy for us to, assume just because, they said biometrics, therefore fingerprints and eyes, but it's ableist to assume that everybody has eyes to scan and fingers to scan. And then therefore it boils down to facial recognition, and as Anil has pointed out, faces change, bodies change. So what then? Every time you need to access a service, somebody is questioning you because you look nothing like the biometric data that's given. And speaking of, somebody checking, law enforcement generally can be an ally, but can also be quite harmful. We spoke a little bit about the COVID context and how law enforcement officers turned out to be major perpetrators of violence towards the community. Can you please say a little bit on that before we go back to the conversation about what resources we have and what we need to put in place?
Yeah, so this is a project that we've been running with our REACT program. We did a kind of pilot in Cape Town of focusing on human rights violations against the trans and gender diverse community specifically. And I'm sure that a lot of you have had a similar, whether you've got specific studies and data or it's just the lived experience, is that whilst a lot of attention gets put on violence against the LGBTQI community in terms of other community members in the geographical community attacking people, and also emphasis on gender-based violence, which are real, what we actually found when we were looking at the data from our REACT program is that law enforcement officials and the police were the majority of the perpetrators. And this is also a concern because this seems to be growing within the COVID context, where there's a lot of anger, and I think that we've all recognized this. The COVID pandemic has had a massive economic impact in terms of particularly the informal sector. And people are very angry because livelihoods have been destroyed. And this economic fallout is going to be with us for years to come. And where people are angry, there are people who are very interested in making sure that that anger is directed towards scapegoats, like marginalized communities, rather than being mobilized towards change and directed towards changing systems in the country. And there are interests that are feeding the violence against scapegoat communities, against our community as the trans and gender diverse community, against the broader LGBTQI community, and in South Africa in particular, in fueling xenophobic violence. And we've had this in the past, and we are starting to see a build-up of xenophobic rhetoric again, and this is of great concern. So the violence is increasing, and it's a big concern that the majority of perpetrators that we were seeing in the context of COVID was actually police and law enforcement officials, because that makes it even more difficult to address those cases, because you don't even get into the front door to report them, because you're reporting the perpetrators to the perpetrators.
Very interesting. It's, you know, you think you have a system working for you, and then the system turns on you. Now, back to the systems that work. You were telling us about, you know, the resources that are available at Freedom House, Dignity for All. Do we as a community tap into those resources? And if we don't, why do we not tap into those resources?
Thank you so much. I just want to do justice to myself. I thought I was told this panel will be very brief. I was trying to be brief, but I can see that I can go deep into it. So thank you so much. Before coming on this stage, I looked into the statistics. And I have to confess that we had very few cases from the region, Southern Africa region. In the past couple of months, we've had provided around 150 supports, not to individual, it can be a group of individuals, but 150 cases, only one came into the region. Meaning Southern Africa activists, if at all they are submitting requests, they are not submitting relevant requests. Remember, we have certain criteria. I can go deep into them. However, the truth of the matter is we have a very few number of cases from Southern Africa. I don't want to assume that activists in Southern Africa are privileged, as we've been talking about privilege, but we compare to other regions, like West Africa or Eastern Africa, where the physical attack is more exposed, or we've seen a lot of cases more than in the region. But the fund is there. We have, I can't say enough fund for everybody, but we do have money, and we're just waiting for you to request whenever. Once again, I repeat, an activist is facing risk linked to the activism. The second segment of the support is the person might not be an activist, but victim of state persecution, meaning a member of community arrested or any government official involved in the attack again, or the threats or targeting the community member. The person might not be an activist, as long as there's a link between the state official and the community member, we can provide financial support. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
And we know that that kind of support is not only available at Freedom House and Dignity for All. We have Frontline Defenders Fund, we have Asian Action Fund for Women. So, Mino, are we privileged? Is that why we're not tapping into these resources?
I don't think so. I think the need for the resources is definitely there. I know that in Zambia, for instance, maybe once some fund was provided when people were incarcerated and they were pardoned and needed relocation because the community was no longer welcoming them back. But, I mean, as you were speaking, my question was, are you all right up there? That wasn't my question, but I'm worried. Oh, yeah, okay? Good, okay. When you were speaking, my question was, do we know about this fund is my first question. I will say I knew about the Dignity for All program, but I only knew about it, I think, maybe 4 or 5 years ago when I traveled to the United States and had a visit at the office. So that was the question that was going through my mind is, do we even know that these resources are available? But then also my question, because I also don't know, is what's the process? And if it's an absolute emergency, which it mostly is, how quickly do people get the support? Because like I said, we don't have the luxury of time when there's a problem. If someone is in the hands of the police, we need to get them out immediately, because the longer they stay there, the more they're being abused, the more information is being drawn from them illegally, but then nothing ever happens even when those illegalities are happening. So I'm not the moderator, but my question would be, do people know, to the audience, but then to Dignity for All program is, what is the process, what does the turnaround time look like? Because if it's gonna take 5 days, in 5 days, it might not be useful anymore.
Yes.
So,
before you answer, let's get a sense from the room. Do we know what resources are available? Just a show of hands for now, and then at the pace we're moving, we might allow for
there's one
some
hand.
2 interventions. These are the hands of people who know about these resources. That's 1 hand, 2 hands, 3 hands, 4, 5, 6. That's appalling.
We're famous.
Okay, we're putting you under the spotlight. Why do we not know? And then secondly, Mino's question about turnaround times. What do we need to do to be able to access those resources?
Why do you not know that much about the program? I'm on the other side. I might not be able to answer for you, but I know that we need, as Dignity for All, to do more communication around the program. We don't do it for a couple of reasons. Whether we've been drained and too much on this particular region, or for security reasons, we also try to only make the communication within a certain, within a network, that not just put on a media, hey, we're here for all dignity people. Like, for example, we don't do, recently we had someone who wanted to write an article about dignity for all. We said, no, it's fine. We supported a particular group in a West African country. They wanted to write an article. We don't, because we are also very cautious of the security of the staff. I travel a lot in countries very hard security-wise or politically repressive. I work on other human rights contexts, and sometimes I face intelligence offices, so that might be some of the explanation of why the communication is not out. The second part of the question is, how can one access that fund? You need, even if you have my phone number or my WhatsApp, it's an opening.
I'm sharing your WhatsApp number.
Yes. So that's a good start to have my or any staff members' contacts. Normally we have a form. Now we ship on an online form you can submit, and we ask a number of questions. If you answer to that, we can move forward. The person at risk might also not be individually able to provide that information. The organization can do, or any relative who is in position to fill all those procedural questions. The other part is, yes, there is a form, but in certain circumstances, I remember I have been in touch with political prisoners. Where they are in prison, I call them, hey, give me your name, your date of birth, give me. We just need to collect certain data and process. The trickier question, I don't know, you are my neighbor and you're attacking me, is the timeline. Before I ask you about the timeline, I want to make it clear whether it's us as Freedom House or Dignity for or any international NGO partner providing this kind of assistance, we should be seen as a medium or longer term solution. There should be a place, and that's why the idea about the protocol is amazingly good. When an activist is at risk, the fastest response has to come from within the region, from within the network. The fastest emergency and sustainable one is from the circle. And to be very good at that, you have to be prepared. And I like sometimes attacking my fellow activists, but we never think about security. We don't think about it until we are at risk. And I can get called at 1 a.m. Every time, oh, I'm at risk. What do you want me to do? I'm 10 kilometers away, 10,000 kilometers. So I have funds, but once again, it will come relatively longer than the situation requires. So that's why I would invite activists, please, you don't need to be an expert, just plan for backup situation when it comes to security. Be wary of your context. I can give a few, I'm not called here for training, but please let us know that they are surveilling us. Whether you see them or not, you are at risk, especially LGBTQI activists. I haven't seen in my short experience any group of activists as targeted as LGBTQI community. In the last couple of months, we have 4 different sub-funds. LGBTQI activists receive 32% among all those 4 sub-funds and subgroups. LGBTQI activists receive 32% of the fund, meaning how targeted this community and activists are. So we have to make sure in every step of our struggle, our fights, the security aspect is taken into consideration. It shouldn't be secondary. Wherever you are, even right now when I'm sitting, I'm looking at the doors. Okay, this is South Africa, maybe, but yeah, we have to be aware of that. Back to you, thank you.
Yes, I've noted you. I just wanted to bring Anil into the Okay. Do you mind standing by the mic?
Yeah, I think we have had a bit of a problem with it, and that's why I think you are finding that people are not applying for dignity for all. Because I don't want to go particular to our case because this is a forum for everybody, but as an example, you get shifted from one place to another. When we did the application to Dignity for All, we ended up getting, it was a really bad emergency, but we ended up getting the funding from FLD. Frontline Defenders, and they did it very fast. But when we wrote to Dignity for All, I kept on getting a message, where did you hear us from? I say, I Googled. The same message comes again. So it was so frustrating. Maybe you need to streamline. And that is why you have seen maybe there are so many hands here who know about you, but they are not able to get to you. Let us get realistic. Sometimes it is very hard to apply, especially when you have an online form where you are, it is like I thought it was a machine because it kept asking me the same thing. I say I Googled. Then it asked me the same question again until I gave up. So maybe the best thing you can do today is to give us because me, I like action. I like things that can happen. Can you give us a concise number that we can call? You have seen there are so many hands being raised, but you are getting very little queries.
Thank you very much for that intervention. I imagine it's like when you're trying on the computer and it says prove that you are human and you have to find the stop signs. And sometimes you don't find all of them and then it's like, do it again, do it again, and do it again. Feedback, constructive feedback for dignity for all. I don't want to make it a dialogue, but if you want to give a brief response, let's do that. And then I have to bring Anil into the conversation.
Definitely, I would be more than happy to answer to that question. Yet it's a reality. I just mentioned that in the course of our work, we have experience of infiltration by intelligence offices, by non-friendly community. Therefore, we try to restrict or minimize external people trying to infiltrate. So the first question is making sure you are an activist or you've heard from us. Let's say I've attended a lot of gathering and when we ask them, hey, where did you hear about dignity? Oh, from this conference. Okay, good. We start processing with a couple of questions. Yes, it might be disturbing, but we're working in a context that requires some filter. That's what explains some of the question about how did you hear about the program. But the answer, I Googled it, should be enough to process, although we're trying to filter. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, I've noted your hand. I've noted, I'm going to be killed. I'm the person who's been standing here making sure people don't go overboard. And now I'm going to be a hypocrite. But before we open it up to you, Anil, there's been a lot of talk about networks, how the immediate networks that we have are necessary for kickstarting, the response protocol while we wait for Dignity for All to stop asking us where we head from them. It's necessary. Yeah. For a lot of our movements, we're still in the formative stages of developing our networks. We recently formed an LBQ network. I know that the intersex movement is also working on creating a network. The trans community is a little more advanced. We have the Southern Africa Trans Forum. Do we have systems in place? Do we have a protocol for responding in emergency situations? Or are there particular resources that are available for trans and gender diverse frontline protectors?
So yeah, I mean, the first thing I want to say is, I think all of us need to start getting more tech savvy, because the thing that is asking us whether we are fourth industrial revolution is the technology is actually outpacing the law. And we need to be very aware of how we are under surveillance and what data is being collected. Because we're talking already about a situation where there is a lot of surveillance on us as activists, particularly in the Southern African region. So yeah, where the thing that's saying, where did you find this? That's an algorithm that's doing that, and it's not happy with your response for some reason. And it's ironic that the robots are asking us if they're human. In terms of the Southern African Trans Forum, we are an emerging movement, and we've been organizing for the last few years, and we've got a network of organizations across Southern Africa. And we do have emergency funding that can be accessed in a lot quicker time than I think a lot of the international funding. I actually had a question with regards to this. So I'm sorry that you're on the spot. Yes, we are. So the question I've got with regards to this is, if we are in a situation where, because obviously we're a small organization, we don't have an unlimited amount of funding, we've got a very small amount of emergency funding. It's there and it's available. It's specifically intended for the trans and gender diverse community, but we will never say no to a sibling contacting us from the broader movement. But if we're in circumstances where the need is exceeding our budget and we are having to draw on other funding that is not earmarked for emergencies, could we potentially pay that upfront and then apply to you to say, this is our emergency, we've got the people out of jail with other funding, but we are now out of pocket?
My other question.
Not the one I'm asking. No, I just want us to maybe you might not be able to answer it now, but maybe it's something to think around. In addition to that, is there also room for maybe rethinking the centralization of emergency fund? So is there a possibility to decentralize this? I don't know if it's regionally, or have something that can easily be accessed by people that are here without having to write to someone in the US. That's already like 7 hours time difference and all that other kind of stuff. So just in addition to that, I don't know.
Okay, I'll accept that question because I was going to answer. Okay.
Thank you so much. I'm the panelist of the panelists. I still want to go back a bit to the question and in relation to the organized movement. One of the struggle we as international partner or NGO trying to provide assistance is the amount of fraudulent cases we receive. Within a certain period of time, we have this particular country, I don't want to name, I know there is no participant from that country. We receive 40 plus per case fraudulent application, or 40 plus percentage, meaning in terms of percentage, of fraud application. So I know I've been criticized a lot around this fraud, but the first thing that comes to my mind when I receive an application, and it's also related to how you've heard about us, is if we have no connection with you, the first mindset is this might be fraud. But if you say, I've heard about you from Kotlano, I know them. I can easily be like, hey, you even WhatsApp, hey, do you know this person? Yes, I know. Quicker. So to help us to prevent the amount of fraud and make the process more faster, we need organized structure, organized networks. We know, and I have this particular country where I told them, hey, I no longer take individual requests. If you have a request, go to this network, we are in touch with them. It helps us filter, it helps us not put prejudice on legitimate cases. Once again, we have a lot of fraud from the community within we work or the applicant. That's one of the reasons, or you might say excuse, about the delays. And that's where I really welcome this idea of regional structure. It might be intra-countries or also international level. It will help us to be faster and more impact. Answering to the question, personally, for the organization, I've been developing a lot of partnership in that sense. Recently, I was in a West African country where I went to meet with local actors and the UN offices. We work a lot with them in some countries. And the partnership was around, they had a small amount of funding, but very small, like 20,000 USD. And within the community, everybody knows that we are some of the lucky and managed in this assistance. So the collaboration was like, they can support for 1 month, and we extend it to 6 months. Meaning they are faster, they can answer the following like in 24 hours. We can't. And as they provide that small grant, we can go for the longer term. We could also, whenever we have a case, we tell the person, go to them. And they fund first after we do all this verification. And your question might be a bit different, where you fund and we reimburse you. Is that the case?
That's what I was talking about.
That's possible, but the risk is we go on a case basis. It might fit in your criteria, but outside our criteria. If I give you a head up without having the first check, and it falls outside our criteria, there might be a problem. But as soon as I see the narrative around the case, what happened, what did what, and I know you did the first verification. I'm like, yeah, we can go ahead as soon as the money is here.
Okay, so there's a possibility of aligning the criteria so that we make sure, okay.
Definitely, and there is even possibility to strategize on our intervention. Cases outside our mandate, we can tell a partner, use fund that. Cases within our mandate, whenever you have them, we refer them. To this answer to the question about decentralization, and I hope it's not decolonization as well, but I'm the personification of the decentralization. Within the Africa team, I'm based in Africa. More than that, I'm based in South Africa. And yeah, I hope I answered the question. Back to you.
Okay, so I'm about to bring in the folks standing up there, but I wanted to make sure that well, the process, and then we can engage externally while that process is in play. And then just before you ended, you also spoke about connecting with others. So you were talking about UN agencies, and I imagine embassies also play a critical role. So we need to join allies, like Nino was saying. So I'm going to take questions from the floor. All the questions are on this side. I don't see anybody on this side. Please ask your question, but then also give your own reflection on what additional resources you think we need for the establishment of a kind of a protocol or system or response mechanism of sorts during a time of crisis. I'm not able to see because of the light, so...
Okay, hi.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Patience Mandishana from Zimbabwe. I think mine is just a quick reflection, and I'll also add on to what you're saying, Pal. I think also we need to also redefine what we mean by an emergency response, or get to a point where we have a conversation of what crisis is. I'll give an example of what's happening in Zimbabwe currently. We are in crisis mode. So when you do approach organizations or platforms that support emergency response, we are like waiting for something to happen because a policy is going to come that's going to shut us down, that's going to put us on the front line, that's going to put our lives in danger. We know that historically in Zimbabwe with the PVO bill. But when we engage in such platforms, it's like we have to have someone who's been arrested first before we can put security in our offices. There has to be something that happens first for us to do that. But I feel we need to also have that conversation around mapping what's happening in country level, what is the current context, what are the risks that we can mitigate before they even happen to us within country, because we know in the next couple of weeks we might be home, locked away in our houses. So I think it's also important for us to redefine, and as you're taking on applications, think about the different country contexts that are happening, rather than reacting to whoever is in jail right now currently. And I think, some of the resources that you're talking about is also just for us, and I'm going to go back to this issue of the country context and the policies and election periods, for example. How do we also speak around that protection mechanism coming down to a national level for us to do those support systems and trainings with the frontline human rights defenders as we are going into a process, but not responding to something that has happened during that period. So I think for me it was just really around being proactive rather than reactive.
Thank you very much, Patience. I've added that. So what you just said about being proactive, but also mapping and identifying risk, redefining what we consider emergency situations, to contextualize it, to speak to the specific context we operate in, and then in addition to a regional level protocol, we need national level ones to feed into that. Excellent, thank you very much. And I'm going to take Fidel down here, and then up there, unfortunately you cannot see who's up there.
So thanks very much. Fidel from Namibia. I just started taking on a job in as a risk management officer under the EVOS Free to Begin project, which is happening in 22 countries, and all countries are having the safety and security officer on board. So I think it's really setting a new trend that I think is important for all NGOs, all initiatives and projects to really have somehow a risk management strategy for the work that we do. And perhaps I'll start with what you said, and that was really what is lacking is really this risk management, both at individual level for activists, but also for organizations and NGOs and civil society organizations, but with communities at large. I can't remember any time in the last 20 years where I've been working in the field where we went out to communities and did a risk assessment with community members and put in place risk management protocols for individual community members so that they know if something happens, this is what I do, this is what I call, this is the app that I use to press an emergency button or whatever there is. But I think it's something that we need to consider instead of reacting to emergencies. Can we plan for security? And back to the panelists, thanks for your insights, especially around the funding that's available. It's always a bit of an issue because you think about it only when you're nervous, when something is happening. And when things like that happen, then when you're asked, identify yourselves when you say, I found you on Google, can become a life and death issue. Because sometimes someone may be on their mobile phone, they may be in hiding, and they may just give up because they didn't get through the algorithms. And so the question really I have is, what is the balance? Because I assume your organization is quite wealthy, if there is enough money. But the person who is on the other end, who's been stopped by an algorithm, may be quite vulnerable. And so where do you draw the balance? I know it's not an easy balance to draw, but I mean, when it's a life and death question for a community, an NGO, or a person, it becomes quite a pertinent question to answer. I wanted to also comment on gender dynamics, comments around surveillance, and that it is a global trend. Well, we've seen it in our work with HIV. 3-4 years ago, PEPFAR came down for research, and they wanted to take digital fingerprints or eyes to identify those who were taking part in research. Clearly the community said no, but we saw it coming back with the COVID vaccination certificates, right? And so the question is, if we are, as LGBT people, already vulnerable in our states and in our countries, a move towards digitalization of identity, how much more does it put us at risk? And to what extent are there risks that it's not just your identity, but the financial record, the criminal record, everything's going to be matched in one place, which would put us even more at risk? And are we thinking and planning around it? Are we advocating for a separation at least of financial versus criminal versus health records being placed in one instrument?
Friedel,
yes.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to...
Sorry, just one more time. Just one more. As a final one, so it is really advocacy for data protection laws. I know that in Namibia, for example, 5-6 years ago, we have what was also probably mentioned by the Zimbabwean contributor, what we call the spy bill. And so our telecommunications can now officially be taken by the state, they can hold it, and they can look at your phone records, they can look at your private conversations. At the same time, we don't have freedom of information. And so what is the advocacy globally in this room around advocating for this? Because this could really be laws that could change government overreach when it comes to our vulnerability and ensure protection.
All right, thank you very much. I see more people are showing up. I will take you even then for a while. We have 4 minutes. In those 4 minutes, they need to respond. Then we need to do a poll. That means you have 1 minute.
Thank you. My name is Yvette Abrams. I'm the director of the Sun and Koi unit here at the University of Cape Town. And my first day on the job, which was a couple of months back, I walk in and 2 of my staff is receiving death threats, and the 3rd person had already been moved to a secure location due to being attacked in her home. And I just wanted to share my experiences from that for what it's worth. This is because we're supporting a community action, for those of you who are from South Africa, around the 2 rivers where Amazon wants to put an office block on our sacred site. So it's not an LGBTI thing, it's a Khoisan thing, but the principle is the same. And I just wanted to say, yes, you must have a protocol, because I was pretty freaked out. It's my first day on the job, but because I'd worked in gender-based violence for 15 years, I just pulled a GBV protocol and I worked with that. So it's you have to remember that you yourself are going to be PTSD'd, and so to have a protocol can save a life. Set up relationships with funders before the shit hits the fan. Because like some people here, I was Googling urgent action. And if it hadn't been my first day on the job, I would have liked somebody to tell me, contact all these people. Say you work in a high-risk area. Set up that relationship. So when the crisis happens, you just have to hit a panic button or send one text, because all your admin's already done. You've been pre-approved. Now the really creepy part of this, going up against Jeff Bezos, is one of my colleagues, says this is starting to look like very deliberate surveillance tactics, and named a couple of foreign intelligence agencies. And I really like it, the gender dynamics is starting to work with issues around digital security, because it doesn't take much to hack into your records. So to back up all your data offline, to set up offline hard copies of, say, your files or your organization records, to make sure you have a landline. Literally, at times during this process, I was happy that I have multiple tech backups. I have a landline, I have a computer that goes to landline internet, I have another one that works with Wi-Fi, I have a cell phone. I find myself having to use all these different forms to stay in touch with activists. So anyway, I just wanted to share that to say, yes, in answer to your question, get yourself a protocol.
Okay, thank you for that. You saved me. I know someone was going to kill me because he went to the trouble of getting the poll done so we can all participate. It would have been really cool. But Neville has been eyeballing me there at the corner. So what we'll do instead is we'll go analog instead of digital and just do by show of hands. Closing remarks, responses to those questions, we have a minute each. And then we're off the stage. Any responses to some of the questions that were definitely directed at the panel and not me?
You want to go first?
Yeah, so just to say, I couldn't agree more with the comments that have been made. We need to be monitoring these developments, and we need to mobilize where we need to mobilize to hold the states accountable, to say, are these going to be within a human rights framework, and if they're not, we need to oppose them very strongly. The other thing I want to say is that as gender dynamics, our policy is always, we don't try to get external experts coming in and try to draw from our own community, so that's our empowerment policy. And there are a lot of community members who are very tech savvy and who work in the industry. And I think that we need to have extending our networks to including the LGBTQI community members, and there are many of them who are working in the tech industries and who can give us the support and the knowledge on how we start dealing with these technologies and these threats. and assessing these risks that we may not even be aware of.
Thank you. Final thoughts, any responses?
I mean, just reflecting on what patients had mentioned, I think just around what are the risks we can identify and mitigate now. Because if we're talking about this protocol, this mitigation strategy, planning it, putting together will take time, will take resources. But we are aware now that we need to start planning for risk. So what is it that we can do right now while we organize the time and the resources to put all this together? And then in closing, I think I would like to say maybe for what's happening in Zambia right now, this entire week, every single day on social media, on various news, it's just saying we definitely need to plan. Because what it looks like also is the way this has been happening is it's very systematic now. So the thinking is it coordinated? Is someone sponsoring that anti-LGBT narrative and rhetoric? And we need to be very careful, because even when a lot of people will talk about it, someone is seeing it, someone is listening, and someone is believing it, and that can create a total disaster for us if we're not ready for it.
We need to do our own coordination.
Yeah.
Last thoughts, any responses to the questions that were posed, and then we're closing.
Thank you so much. Do you know that for me to go to my own country, I need to write a security protocol to my office? How am I getting in? The checkup? Am I through the customs service or not? I work a lot with politically tense issues. I recently went to this country. 2 days after I met an activist, he was arrested for plotting against the president. I had to be in a UN vehicle to get to the airport. It was hectic. So, but I'm able to save myself or because of the planning. I want to emphasize the needs. Yes, you might need experts. But I would also recall us, this is a matter of life and death. Let us not wait for funding. If you go to any of the funders or international NGO in your country, hey, you have a security expert, can you just offer us a training? You don't need to write a proposal. If they are of good faith, they will just give you an expert. The space you use for your normal meetings, they go there, no need for per diem, for proposal. Those are some of the fastest measures you can adopt to prevent those situations. But I'm talking about prevention. I also want to talk about collaboration and also building, someone mentioned it, internal experts. Meaning you might write the nicest, the best protocol, but if it's not applied, forget about it. So you have to have someone within the organization who will make sure every single meeting you talk about security. And the person, if anyone is breaching security measure, call to order. Hey, this is not allowed. It's very common within the activist gatherings. Someone tweeting, hey, I'm here in this room that day, that time, we're doing about this. Come on, someone needs to say, hey, please delete this. Remember, we have the activist blood, but we cannot move forward if we are dead or killed. So let us take the security extremely seriously, and once again, let us not only write protocols, apply every day. But please, I have a last request. Please, let us be kind to each other. I've seen a lot of my life, my days, only hearing about bad news about the activists. This is the few occasions I see you guys smiling to each other. But normally my mail is flooded, I'm dying. Yesterday I received a message saying, I will never forget you, thank you so much. 5 minutes later, another message said, I will have to kill myself. So that's how, it was a bit shocking to me to see people are smiling here, because normally I see people talking about that. I will kill myself. Thank you so much, back to you.
On that sobering note, do we agree that we need a regional security protocol? Yes. All right. I know it's done. Thank you so much.